So thank you all for coming to the Economics Department's Delphi panel. My name is Ben Atwater, marketing major and an economics minor. As your programs read, the Delphi panel is a method of forecasting used in business. The key point of the panel is that a group decision is more accurate than the individual. We have handpicked these prestigious panel members to discuss 5 complex political and social issues. Panelists will each have 2 minutes to give an answer to a question. We implore that the panelists explain their reasoning and mindset to the answers using their worldly knowledge and business experience. After each panelist has given their answer, there will be a second round in which panelists can refute their colleagues. There will be an additional 1 minute per panelist in the second round. When 30 seconds are left in any round, I will hold up this sign to dictate the panelists to wrap up. The audience can keep up with the panelists' answers by filling in the grid found in their programs. This will provide a level of interactiveness. We hope this provides an insightful thought tank for both the audience and panelists alike. I now turn to my fellow co-chair, Ashley LeBlanc, to introduce the panelists.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley. I am an economics major here at UNH. I'm just going to introduce some of our panelists. So our first one right here is John Rosen. Am I saying your last name right?
That works.
Okay. Rosen has helped firms deliver really unique growth, both domestically and globally, through industries using financial services, telecom, apparel, and retailing. He's also been a long-time executive director for MCA Works, leading global marketing and strategy consultancy. He has also worked for, a co-author for Stopwatch Marketing to take charge of the time when your customer decides to buy. And he also is has a consulting career with domestic and global clients, responsibility as a senior partner at Marketing Corporation of America and as a managing director at Oliver Wyman and Company. Our next panelist is Marcello Nacht.
Nacht, yeah, you got it.
Nacht, okay. Has over 30 years of experience with leadership positions at iconic research and branding firms. Has a particular expertise in helping category leaders and challengers to develop profitable market segmentation and targeting strategies. Our next panelist is Murat.
Murat, yeah.
Murat, am I saying it right? I'm sorry. He's been in capital market business for over 27 years in a variety of areas and roles. He's been founding the Phaser Consulting as a senior member of the constructed finance business at Excel Financial Solutions. And from 1994 to 1999, he was with the Citicorp Securities Incorporation as a senior financial engineer and marketer. Our next panelist is Carolyne Soper. She is the chair of the business department at Lincoln College of New England. She spent 10 years in financial services, and now she's made the transition to academia, where she found her passion for educating her students. She is pursuing a doctoral degree in finance at Sacred Heart University and currently researching the relationship between the uncertainty index and treasury bonds. And our last panelist is David Sacco. He's had 28 years of experience in the financial industry, spending most of his time at UBS. He is also, his last role at UBS was a global co-head of the rates business, overseeing sales and trading in government securities. And lastly, he has a bachelor's and an MBA from New York University.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley. The first question is, what will be the end result of net neutrality following Tom Wheeler's comments? For those not aware, I'm going to ask panelist John Rosen to explain the net neutrality issue, if you don't mind.
Explain the issue.
Just briefly.
All right. The bandwidth coming into your home or your dorm room or your building is, while it seems infinite, at the end of the day, limited by technology. And for the recent past, as streaming of videos by people like Netflix has sucked up more and more and more of that bandwidth, the providers, the Verizons and AT&Ts and Optimums, people like that, have made some noises about we should be able to either give discounts for people that use a lot, like Netflix, or the other way around, charge more, charge premium prices. In other words, stuff coming into your laptop or your iPad or whatever might come at different speeds based on what that supplier, be it Netflix or any other operation, is willing to pay. In general, conservatives on the political spectrum think that's perfectly fine, and their rationale is that in all other things, free markets obtain, right? People will pay higher prices. If you need to get something FedExed, you have to pay more than if you put it in the mail. And so the idea on that side of the political spectrum is that indeed it's perfectly fine for somebody like Verizon to charge Netflix more or less based on what they can negotiate with the Netflix. The counter argument, generally subscribed to by liberals or progressives on the political spectrum, is that leaves it completely open to both corruption and monopoly by people who have a lot of money to spend, and that therefore legally the providers like Verizon must be constrained from offering different pricing tiers. In other words, if you're a brand new app developer, you ought to have the same speed into somebody's home as Netflix, which sucks up half of the bandwidth. It is technologically, as I understand it, technologically it can be programmed to do anything you want. It's not a technological issue other than you got to decide what the laws are going to be and what the guidelines for the industry are going to be.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Rosen. We will now move into the questions, to the panelists' responses, rather, I should say. I ask that you keep the questions, I ask that you keep your conclusions very concise, and just that you, once more, you explain your mindset and logic. Once again, you will have 2 minutes. All right, John Rosen, you have 2 minutes.
What is the specific question?
So what will be the end result of net neutrality following Tom Wheeler's comments?
Excuse me.
All right, 2 minutes starting now.
Okay. Your specific question was end result. The end result will be changes in the regulations several years down the road to allow the alternative to net neutrality, and I don't even know what that's called, but non-net neutrality. We allow pricing tiers, but that is several years away. Why do I say this? Telecom regulation follows this evolution a lot. You can study going all the way back to the original AT&T telephone monopoly in this country, and there are a lot of similarities. And it might surprise you at your age to know this, but when I was growing up, you didn't own your phone. You rented your phone from the government-authorized monopoly. And that was for the very same reason. It was to protect small business people from being gouged and independent residents from being gouged. Over time, as technology evolves, eventually people lobby their congressmen. And I would just ask you for a moment to imagine if you had to deal with that. You had to rent your phone from AT&T, period. That's the end of your choices. Consumers in America eventually demand choices. Excuse me, I have a cold, I apologize. Consumers in America eventually demand choices. They usually end up expressing that via lobbyists and congresspeople. Eventually they get choices, and eventually regulations change. To repeat the beginning of my answer, that's a long-term, which was your question. The long-term end is that this will change. In the interim, there will be endless, and I do mean endless, litigation. And the people who are going to get rich on this are lawyers.
Right, that's 2 minutes. Thank you very much. We now go to Marcello Nacht.
Okay.
What will be the end result of net neutrality following Tom Wheeler's comments? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I do agree with John's last point. I think there's going to be a lot of happy attorneys in Washington, D.C., seeing a big financial gain down the road over the next few years. There's going to be lots of litigation over this. The ISPs are now going to be regulated as a communications utility. That's the first time that's happened. In the past, they were considered information providers and they weren't regulated as a utility. They're jumping up and down saying they're not a utility, and they're concerned about price pressures being put on them. They no longer will be able to charge people like Amazon. According to the new rules, they will no longer be able to charge people like Amazon and Netflix a premium to push their content through their pipes. So there will be increasing price pressures on them. And I think the price pressure on them is going to be, and the revenue pressures on them is going to be exacerbated by people like you in this room who may not, when you go off to start your life, may not subscribe to a cable provider. You guys are going to, a lot of you guys are going to be cord cutters. You're going to just subscribe to internet providers, and you're going to just use the over-the-top services like Netflix, like Amazon, like Hulu, and that's even going to put further price pressures on the ISPs. So I think in the short term, I think we are going to see a rise in internet provider prices to the consumer. That's my prediction. But I think that can only go so far before the FCC steps in and begins to exercise some of their authority to regulate their pricing, even though the telecoms and mobile telecom providers have been under FCC authority for decades, and the FCC has never stepped in to regulate their pricing. So I think that the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty small, but my prediction is that in the short term, I think we could see a rise in rates from ISP providers to consumers.
All right, thank you very much. That's 2 minutes. So, rise of rates to consumers. Okay. I now turn to Murat Akgun. What will be the end result of net neutrality following Tom Wheeler's comments? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I agree with John and Marcello. I did a certain point
Can you
too.
speak up a little bit?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I agree with the two previous speakers as well. That when you look at the history of regulation, there's a lot of unintended consequences that come out of that. I think in today's discussion, it is a sort of a putting a price cap on for the consumers and all that. But what will happen is eventually, when these companies become like utilities, there's actually less incentive for them and an opportunity to invest in growth, in new technologies, and sort of better their product. So and what it will create is, again, is sort of a limited supply, because you'll have less people going into this. It's not as interesting business as it could be. There will be a little bit of a rise, but eventually, if you look at it, market forces sort of take over, and I think some of those regulations over time will just disappear, and prices will come down, and it'll be more of and then you'll see a lot of innovation come to the market, just like it happened in the telecom business after AT&T broke up. And you look at there are parallels in the aircraft, the airline business too. When it was regulated, prices were so much higher and much more limited. And once it was deregulated, now we can fly the same distances for half the price we did 20 years ago.
All right. So your end conclusion?
That I think today's regulation over time will actually open into sort of a more market-based system.
Okay.
And prices will go down, but initially after they go up, and because of the limited supply.
All right. Thank you very much. I now turn to Carolyne Soper, our female panelist.
I like that. Okay, so net neutrality. So ultimately, my thoughts are net neutrality needs to exist because we need to support innovation in business, and companies like Google and other internet companies would cease to exist without net neutrality. And so when you talk about increased regulation, my concern is that becomes a political issue, because what happens? Well, Republicans don't want anything to do with regulation, and Democrats want more regulation. So that's kind of the fundamental piece that I come back to. So what's going to happen after these comments that were recently made and the change of how telecommunication is defined, well, I agree. I think the prices are going to go up because as the lawsuits increase by these companies like Comcast and Verizon, because they want to charge more. They want to say, well, wait, you're streaming Netflix, because that's what I do, like most of us. You're, playing games, you're doing all this, you're increasing your bandwidth, and you're costing us more money to kind of keep up with your demand. Ultimately, they are going to want to charge more, so we're going to see an increase in price down the road.
All right, so increase in price.
Should I give a time frame on that? Do you want me to increase in price in?
Yeah. So Jay Allen could not make it today, unfortunately. So this is a 5-member panel, in which case I turn to David Sacco, please. What will be the end result of net neutrality following Tom Wheeler's comments? You have 2 minutes.
I think it'll be very little change in the long run and in the short run. I mean, as John pointed out, there'll be a lot of regulations that the FTC will come out with. There'll be a lot of lawsuits by the businesses involved in providing internet service to people, and we'll hear a lot about it in the news. There'll be a lot of lawsuits, but at the end of the day, I think that if you think about how the internet got created, I mean, we've gone from 0 to almost science fiction levels of technology, which you guys can't appreciate, but when we were your age, this stuff literally was in science fiction movies, and now we have it in our hand, right? You think about a show like Star Trek in the 1960s, we have better technology than they had in the TV show in our cell phones right now. So I think given how fast the technology's progressed and how much innovation is taking place, that even though the regulators will come up with these roadblocks to try to regulate things and control prices, at the end of the day, there'll be enough innovation to overcome that. And, a simple example is, I get why a regulator would be concerned about who controls the access to your house in terms of running that wire to your house and how much they can charge you based on how much you use. But 5 years from now, would it surprise any of us if we no longer even have wires running to our house and everything happens over Wi-Fi networks without any wires coming into your house? So you take between cable companies, cell phone companies, the fact that you can get free Wi-Fi almost everywhere, I think the technology and the people who are involved in these companies and businesses will always find ways to deliver us everything we want as quickly as we want it. And I disagree with the rest of the panel on the prices because there's so much competition now, let's say in the cell phone business, where people are just literally trying to take customers from other cell phone users, that price pressure in the short term will keep them from raising prices.
Okay, so your argument is very little
Very
change.
little.
So before we take the poll of the crowds, we have John Rosen saying prices will rise. Yes. We have Marcello Nacht also saying prices will rise. And Murat Akgun says prices will sink.
Eventually, yeah.
And Carolyne says prices will rise. And David says prices will stay the same. So we have 3 options. So I leave it to Ms. Ashley to poll the crowd.
All right, so who believes that the prices will go down? Just raise your hand. I'm just going to do like a tally. Just 2? 3? Okay. Who believes that it'll stay the same?
Lots. That's good. Interesting.
You could just say lots.
More than.
Who believes it'll go up? The price will go up. About 5 years? Okay. So pretty much it'll stay the same.
Okay. Now we move on to round 2, in which case the panelists, if they would like to add anything, possibly persuade their fellow panelists, to come to their side. This is the opportunity for that. This will only be a 1-minute session in which you have to push the issue. So if you want to persuade your fellow panelists, or if you changed your decisions, this is the time to do that. So this is the meat of the Delphi panel, where we really have the group just really coming to a decision together. So once again, we will start with John Rosen. So you have 1 minute. And I will hold up the sign again when we're at 30 seconds.
Okay, I do want to address the increased price issue, which a couple of people have disagreed on. A couple of people down the road have said it either go down or stay the same. I think as a general proposition, it's almost impossible to imagine that greater regulation can lead to anything other than increased pricing. You can accuse me of being too far right-wing, but nonetheless, my belief is that by definition, regulation leads to greater pricing. What might be very interesting, I think it's very likely that this will happen, is if you think about what this regulation does, it protects the ISPs, the service providers. Their pricing will go up because they can now. The government has just said you can. It may, however, not mean that pricing goes up to the end consumer. That is in the nature as well of regulation. And at the end of the day, what the regulation does then is just shift profits from one sector to another. In other words, when airlines were heavily regulated,
that is the time, unfortunately. Sorry to cut you off mid-point.
That's quite all right.
It's the nature of the panel. Okay, thank you very much, John Rosen. So we now turn to Marcello, if you would like to respond to that. Or to
yeah, I
anything
do.
else
And maybe John can clarify, but my understanding is that the net neutrality rulings that are coming down will preclude the ISPs from charging different rates to the content providers. So I'm not really understanding how the shift in revenues is going to occur. Now, given that we're dealing with giant companies, giant corporations, publicly traded, lots of pressure on them to maintain stock prices, lots of pressure on them to maintain profitability, given that we're dealing in a world of limited numbers of households there, when the revenue drops from one bucket, meaning your revenue is going down from what you're charging the content providers, you got to make that up somewhere else, otherwise your revenues are going to drop, your stock price is going to drop. So I think there'll be tremendous pressure on the ISPs to maintain their revenues, and that's why I think that pricing is still going to go up in the short term.
Okay, so you guys are still holding to the point. Excuse me. Now, Murat, you've contended that prices will inevitably sink. So
yeah,
this is your time if you want to
right, because
that, or?
I mean, what happens is I don't think the regulation will hold for a long time, and there's always these fears of, oh my God, you know, these companies have a monopoly. There are 5 of them. You know, they can charge whatever they can charge, and people won't start their businesses and all that, which has not been borne at all. I mean, look at the explosion in the tech sector in the last 10 years. And what happens is, over time, if a sector becomes really profitable, there'll be many more entrants coming into that sector, which inevitably pushes the prices down. And you see that in any industry that's sort of free market, hot, with heavy demand. You know, it attracts a lot of new players who want to get more customers, and you know, the way to do that is push the prices down, and they've reached the economies of scale for the whole industry, and that's what's going to happen again in this field.
So you're still holding that
Yes.
prices will inevitably sink?
I am.
All right. Caroline, you also said they will rise, so if you want to respond to
Sure.
Murat or anybody.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure that we clarified prices will rise on what end. Will they rise for the consumer? Will they rise for the ISP providers? Will they rise for the content providers as well? Because ultimately, when we compare it to industries like, you know, for instance, we mentioned Verizon, and now look what happens. We used to have free data, right? Unlimited data with. Now, no, I'm always yelling at someone in my house because they go over their data. And so I do believe ultimately prices are going to rise. I don't know when, maybe not in the short run, maybe not in a year or so, but with this increased regulation or case-by-case basis, as it's referred to, someone's going to have to offset those costs.
So will prices rise on the consumer end or the content provider?
I think on the consumer.
And just to clarify, John and Marcello, you think rise on the consumer?
Consumer, yeah. For me.
For me, I'm not clear. It's not clear to me that it'll be passed on to the consumer. I think there'll be a serious shift from people like Google and Netflix to the internet service providers. In other words, the service providers will be able to raise. They've been given by this legislation a chance to raise price. They have competition in getting money from you, the Netflixes and Googles have. So I don't think the prices to you and me will go up.
Google's laying their own fiber, so who knows what's going to happen.
For that very reason. For that, because they don't like paying all that money to Verizon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And now, David?
I just want to clarify my position. I'm not making a prediction about what prices are going to do. I'm just saying that the regulation, I don't think, is going to have any impact on the path of the prices going forward. I think that the innovation and the technology is just so overwhelming that no matter what the regulators try to come up with, the innovation and technology will outpace it. And again, the example I'll use is, you think about your cell phone now. I mean, those of you, I'm sure most of you hook up to free Wi-Fi wherever you can on your cell phone. And in areas like this, it's like being able to walk across water on stones that are in the water. You almost never have to use your 4G. So we're all at the point now where we essentially get everything we want for free in terms of data streaming. And that genie's out of the bottle, and these companies aren't going to be able to kind of go back on that at this point. So they're going to have to figure out ways to keep delivering it to us for free. So I don't think the costs are going to go up.
If I can just add, can I do that? Yeah. I actually agree with David because I think the market forces will overtake the regulation effects. So my prediction in prices going down is really a general prediction, with or without, the market forces, I think, will push prices down. But I agree with David that the regulation over long term is not going to have an effect because the market forces will overtake the regulation.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. So we are going, before we pull the crowd, the new options we have is John and Marcello. John thinks that prices will rise for the content providers. Marcello thinks prices will rise for the consumer. Murat thinks that it will have no long-term impact then. Okay.
Due to the regulation.
Due to the regulation.
Right.
And Carolyne thinks prices will rise on the consumer end, and David thinks that prices will still have no impact. So we're coming to the group decision, to the final round, but I'm going to ask Ashley to pull the crowds once more. So we have rising on the content provider, rising on the consumer, and no impact.
All right, so hands who thinks there rise on the consumer end?
Me.
Okay. Who thinks it's going to be on the provider end? And who thinks it's going to be no change? Okay.
So is the crowd consensus? Is it no change?
No change, yeah. Well, mostly. Yeah.
Okay. Now this is the final round where we're going to come to a panel decision, collective decision. So,
All right, John.
What?
yes.
We're gonna arm wrestle or
Get
something?
very
I don't know.
So, any last thoughts or something that you really want to urge your fellow panelists to come to a consensus on before the crowd votes on it? But we need to come to a consensus by the end of this round. So, John, you have 1 minute.
Okay, I would say two things. One is, these are the kinds of things where it's very hard to measure the specific impact. So when David and some of the others say, be very hard, it doesn't think the regulation itself will lead to price increases. It's going to be very hard. Maybe some of you guys can do PhD theses on this, to track the impact of pricing 5 years from now back to this specific regulation, because a million other things happen, like technology and other regulations and so forth. So it'll be very hard to track. Second thing is, we need a very specific definition if we're going to come to consensus of what kinds of pricing are we talking about. Are we talking price per minute, or price per gigabyte downloaded, or total pricing? In other words, Netflix may end up paying more in total because they suck up half the internet every night, but they may end up paying less per minute because that's the way capitalism often works, right?
It's time. So, okay, now we move on to Marcello. For your final.
I don't have a lot to add. I do want to go back to the point that Carolyne made, which I thought was a great point about what's happened with our data plans. I think that's a great example of where we started at years ago, and because there is a limited capacity, there is a limit to this pipe, that the providers have found an opportunity to generate greater revenues by limiting just how much data we can stream on a monthly basis, or charging us more for unlimited plans.
Sorry.
So I think Carolyn's point is a good point. I think it tends to support the opportunistic nature of the ISPs to charge more if they can.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So, just to recap, so John's final consensus is that prices will rise, and we're not sure on which medium.
That's right. Not sure where that'll fall, but I believe ISPs will make more revenue.
Okay.
I believe ISPs got to deal with this regulation. What?
Only whatever happened if they were making money.
It's not the time for crowd participation.
Send me an email.
Yes. And Marcello, your final point was the same. ISPs will make more revenue.
They'll charge more. In the
Okay.
short term, they will charge more.
ISPs will charge more. So that is two panelists' consensus. Now, Murat, do you have 1 minute? Do you like to agree?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just stay with my previous comments. I mean, some of our prices, prices fluctuate. Nothing works in a marketplace. There's never straight line pricing one way down or up. There's dislocations as certain supply and demand factors come into the markets. There's still a huge part of the population that hasn't actually participated as much as we have maybe in this room. It's as they increase, and we still have no idea where technology is, right? In a free market, there's always incentive that technology will increase and will meet the demand going forward, and so.
So do you agree ISPs will make more revenue?
Well, ISPs will make more revenue, but the question is the price is going to be going up or down. I think, regulation will not have an effect on what happens there.
Okay.
Technology
So
will take over.
regulation will still have no effect. Okay. Caroline?
Okay,
2 cents.
so I'm sticking with my prices will
Speak up
rise.
a little bit, please.
Sorry, I'm sticking with my point that prices will rise for consumers ultimately, because I think about the demand and I think about how I canceled Comcast because now I stream Amazon TV. And I think about the, what's that doing to Comcast? Well, they're losing money and they've tried to keep me, but I said, no, I'm sticking with Amazon TV because I only paid $80 for that and I can stream everything, Netflix, YouTube. So ultimately, what's going to happen there? It's going to be good this year, but down the road, they're going to need to increase the prices for that streaming service. So I'm going to pay for it at some point, but I'll enjoy it while I have it.
So you argue that this will increase the revenue?
Increase prices.
Increase prices.
I'm sorry.
Yes. No, that's it.
All right.
But I don't know.
So we have 3 increased prices, 1 no effect. And now we move on to the final panelists for round 1. David Sacco, you have 1 minute.
I would agree with some of what's been said in terms of, I think the mix of where the revenue goes will get rejiggered in this whole combination, but I don't really have any thoughts as to who's going to win and who's going to lose. I still stick with the premise that for the consumer, we're going to continue to get more content and more value for better pricing. But either the ISPs or the content guys, one of them is going to win and or lose that battle. So there'll be some rejiggering of the revenue within there. But I think it still winds up being a value proposition for consumers over time that the regulation won't have any impact on that. It'll have an impact on the rejiggering of the revenue on the different participants, but not the consumer.
So your final says that it will have no effect?
No effect on consumers will continue to get more and more value for lower prices.
So the panel has ruled 3 in the terms of more revenue, which leads to higher prices, and 2 in which no long-term effect. So that means that the panel has collectively decided by majority that prices will rise due to increased revenue. Sorry, Murat and David. Now we're going to take the final crowd poll. So prices will rise and versus no effect. So Ashley.
Okay, so who thinks the prices will rise? Raise your hand again. Okay, who thinks it will?
Interesting. It's still the same though.
Increasing rise?
I mean, let's sum it over. Who thinks it will rise? Who thinks green prices will rise? And then who thinks it'll decrease?
All right, so what's the crowd majority?
Stay the same, right?
About status.
Oh my goodness, and who thinks it will stay the same? All right,
All right.
consensus right there.
But
Alrighty.
it went up a little bit.
Jot it
Now
down.
it's down.
So that ends the first round. Pretty cool, right? Well, but you can't go home yet. We have we have some more questions. So, we'll take like a minute to just.
Skip to question 3.
We'll get to question 3.
No, skip to it next. I'm serious.
Okay. Alrighty. So, we're gonna move on to question 2 now. Yeah, don't worry, Howard, it'll come. So, similar format, you guys will each have 2 minutes for your initial response. And the question is, how will the Supreme Court rule in King v. Burwell? For those of you who do not know, that is the Affordable Care Act. I'm going to ask Marcello to give a very brief explanation of the whole case, if that's all right.
I will try. As my understanding is that there are 6 to 7 magical words that the plaintiffs, in this case King, have settled upon in the Affordable Care Act that says the government will subsidize participants in healthcare programs in which in states in which there is an exchange that has been established in that state. And the plaintiffs have brought the case, and it's now at the Supreme Court. They're going to rule on it in the summer. And the plaintiffs are saying, aha, you know, there are 37 states, 34 states plus 3 that kind of don't really participate. There are 37 states out there that don't have their own exchanges. They're really operating under the exchanges that were set up by the federal government. So the law in those states has to be rolled back. Then people in those states are going to be thrown off the insurance rolls. It could, you know, it could affect 9 million people. Estimates are as high as 9 million. But that's the complaint that they're bringing before the court. The defense is arguing, no, you can't take these 6 to 7 words out of context. It's very clear what the intent of the law is, that it is meant to say that, look, these are exchanges that are operating within a state, whether they're state-run or federally run, they're operating within that state, and you've got to take those words within the context of the law, and you have absolutely no legal right to roll back the Affordable Care Act in those states. So that's the case before the Supreme Court. And as I said, they heard the arguments earlier this year, and they're going to rule on it in the summer, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we will jump right in. So John Rosen, you have 2 minutes.
What's the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. The question is, how will the Supreme Court rule in King v. Burwell?
I believe the court will ultimately rule in favor of the government, in favor of the Obama administration, and find for the defendants, not the plaintiff. Why do I say that? I believe that Chief Justice Roberts is indeed very concerned about the image of the court and about his legacy, and he does not want to be remembered as the guy who blew up this beautiful health care plan over 6 words. I believe it will break very much like the earlier case on Obamacare, where the 4 conservative judges will say the plain language says you can't do this. And the 4 liberal justices will say a version of what Marcello claimed the defendants are saying, that you have to look at the totality of the law and the intent of the law at the time, and you're going to end up with an absurd and painful result if you find in favor of the plaintiffs. That will therefore be split 4-4, and Roberts will come down on the defendant's side, on the government side, on the liberal side, for the reasons I raised. Not because he thinks it makes for good law, but because he is primarily concerned that 50 years from now, when the history of the Roberts Court is written, it is not written that this guy was just a political hack who wanted to blow up Obama.
All right, so that is in favor of the government. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And now we move on to Marcello.
I agree with John. I think it's going to be a 5-4 decision. I think Roberts will be the swing vote for those same reasons. I think it's going to initially break down very much along party lines. Kennedy, who sometimes is a swing vote, I think will side with the plaintiffs in this case. I think Roberts has already played his hand and it kind of indicated how he's going to vote on this. In the the mandate ruling that came down last year, he sided with the government and upheld Obamacare, so I think that's one indication of how he's going to vote. And then there's a stronger indication in that Ginsburg wrote a position, I'm not sure, a few weeks ago she wrote a position on the issue around taking these 6 words out of context, and he sided with her on that position. So, you know, he's already kind of played his hand. So I think it's going to be close, but I think it'll be a 5-4 decision against the plaintiff, and the ruling will be in favor of Burrell.
Okay, so in favor of the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So Burrell. Now we move on to Murat. You have
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add to John and Marcello. I think the decision will be in favor of the government. I mean, there's obviously a lot of the political issues that we all love to read and talk about. But there's also a strong, you know, the concepts of letter of the law and the spirit of the law are, you know, very much existent concepts with a lot of precedents in practice of law. So, you know, certain laws are written, whether you like Obamacare or not, that's not really going to be a decision about that so much. You know, part of it is, again, like John said, you know, not creating this whole hullabaloo. But the discussion also is a legitimate discussion in that, yeah, maybe the law was poorly written, but what was the original spirit of the law? You know, as long as you can establish that, you know, the words may come secondary depending.
okay. So in favor of Burwell.
Yeah.
Okay. Caroline, you have 2 minutes. Make sure to speak up.
Okay. Okay, so I also believe the Supreme Court will vote in favor of Burrell. I believe that this is going to happen because when you look at the actual case and the implications if the Supreme Court votes the other way, there are the 34 states that chose to set up an exchange or funnel their exchange through healthcare.gov. And so what happens if healthcare.gov, if they lose their subsidies? So if they lose their subsidies, the 8 million people that chose to get healthcare through that exchange will no longer receive them, and you know, and so that in turn will make the exchange useless because the healthy people will drop out. And what happens if the healthy people drop out? Well, rates go up, and so there'll be no more. So I do believe that the Supreme Court will vote in favor of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
All right. So also for Burwell. So move on to David Sacco.
I'm going to be the outlier. I think the government's going to lose the case, and I agree with a lot of what people here said. I think if you believe, like I do, that in the original case, Roberts actually was going to vote against Obamacare and then changed his vote for exactly the reasons that John mentioned. I think the difference between that case and this case, in that case, if he voted that the law was unconstitutional, it tore down the whole law and they'd have to start over again. In this case, if they say that the clause is accurately written, all it does is invalidate the subsidies in those states that didn't create exchanges, and it then throws the ball back into the court of the Congress and the President to fix the law. So there's a remedy where they can fix the law. I think it's Justice Scalia has also talked about the idea that they can make a decision and give the government a window of which to actually get the law fixed. So they can rule against the government, say, okay, we're not going to make this go into effect until 6 months from now, and force them to then just fix the law itself, which I think gives Justice Roberts the air cover to sort of, you know, not go down the path that John mentioned before, which I think is a valid concern. I think that's why he changed his vote the first time. But I think now he can stick with his principles and let the government actually fix the law, which it was poorly written.
Okay, so David, you are in favor of King.
Yes.
So the first 4 panelists are in favor of Burwell, and David is the outlier in favor of King. Ashley, will you pull the crowd?
Sure. Okay. Who's in favor of Burwell? 1, 2.
Or it's not who's in favor. Who do you think the Supreme Court will rule for Burwell being the continuation of the Affordable Care Act?
The government?
Yes.
Okay, and who's in favor of King?
It's pretty
Pretty
close.
split.
Pretty split.
Yeah.
So, we will move into round 2. If any of you guys want to persuade David to come over to the dark side,
You can try.
So, John, you have 1 minute.
I do think that you can't separate the politics. So I think, I really believe in his heart Roberts would like to rule against the government. And he would like to say, damn it, Congress has to quit writing sloppy laws. Congress has to write laws that make sense and are internally coherent and consistent, and it's not my job as Chief Justice to fix the sloppiness of the legislature. But I believe Roberts won't hang out there alone. In other words, if it's going to be 5-4, Roberts is going to support the government in a 5-4 decision. If he can get somebody else to come along so that it's at least 6-3, then he will vote in favor of the plaintiffs. I don't believe he's going to get there. I believe it's going to be 5-4, and therefore, just like the Sebelius case 2 years ago, he'll come down on the government's side.
Okay, that is time. Thank you, John Rosen. Marcello, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add that Roberts is a smart guy, and I agree with John's earlier point that he is very concerned about the image of the court. He doesn't want to see the court as just the legal wing of the Republican Party. But I think as a smart guy, he also realizes that we're heading into a 2016 national election. And throwing 9 million people off the insurance rolls during a national election is not necessarily going to be good for his party. So I think whether he likes it or not, I think there will be some backroom pressure from his own party to uphold this decision. So I just don't see the court striking it down, ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. I do think that if he can convince Kennedy to come over with him and be on the defense, then maybe he can vote against the defense with a clear conscience. But I don't see that happening. Kennedy has lately been kind of moving to the right.
That is time, but thank you very much. Murat?
Yeah, I will hold my position too. I mean, there's just too much dislocation by sort of voting for King, and this for the same reasons we heard before. I think it's going to stay. Roberts has shown the ability to, well, the court has shown the ability to turn things around. For example, if you look at the campaign finance laws, they said, look, the First Amendment, they sort of brought up the First Amendment issue and said, look, it's a bad law, go fix it. It's not our job. We're not the legislator. We're the court. So, but it was an easier decision to sort of go and fix it. It'll take time, and it's not that disruptive to the society, where this one is much more of, especially in an election year. So they're just going to
So maintaining the position. Caroline?
Right. So you mentioned the time frame to fix the wording in the law, and so the concern was that the deadline they gave is something, May of 16. And so realistically, for that to happen, for the states to set up their own exchange by May of 2016, it's not going to happen. So I do believe that the Supreme Court is going to vote in favor of Obamacare, and so I'm standing with that.
Thank you very much. And David, have you been swayed at all?
No.
Okay. Well, we do indeed have an outlying majority, and that's good. Diversity is very good. But for time's sake, we're going to expedite the round 3 for this. But would anybody in the crowd like to change their votes? Ashley?
Hi. Who is everyone still in favor of Burwell?
Well, let's see.
Changing? Right. So just if you're now in favor of, we believe that the Supreme Court is in favor of Burwell, just raise your hand.
See, yes.
Which is
Government or not
Government, yeah.
Government.
Right.
And then in favor of King.
Okay.
Burwell.
So
Wait, are there
the
40
crowd-
people in this room and 5 people just raised their hand in both? Yeah. I mean, maybe everybody could actually vote.
Thank you, David. Yes, please.
Do you want to try it again?
Your
Okay.
count.
So in favor of Burwell.
And if you don't have an opinion, make it up.
And
Okay.
then in King.
All right, so
Burwell.
Burwell is the both wins in the crowd and the panel, so we have come to that consensus. And again, this is something, once it's published on the collective, we will be able to check back in, a couple of months and see, we were right, we got on the money. Okay, moving on to question 3. This one's interesting. Will Greece secede from the EU in the next decade? Now, when I say the next decade, I mean the next 10 years. So, by 2025.
Oh.
No, because I don't mean by 2030. I mean by yes, that's why.
In the next 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That changes everything for me.
Yeah. So, Murat, would you like to give a
Sure.
very, very brief, like 1-minute explanation?
Sure.
On the whole?
I think most of us who've watched TV or read papers know the problem Greece has gotten themselves into. They basically come to a default position, not necessarily there through EU's help, but where they are now is they have spent more money than they have for decades. Their tax collections have been horrible. Their government spending has been really high, and at some point, it became not sustainable. Now they're going back to EU, looking for more money to sort of, fix the problem and sort of live to see another day so they can correct things. Now there's a big discussion as to whether Germany in particular, but Northern Europe should help Greece or should push the austerity measures. If you look at one side of the spectrum says, look, austerity just kills and makes their job much more difficult. They should sort of be given more money to correct their house. And then the other side of the discussion is, look, they knew what they were doing. You can't expect the Northern European taxpayers to throw good money after bad. They should fix their order. They knew what was coming. And that's the end of that. And part of this discussion is, obviously the debtors, the investor nations have some incentive in seeing Greece come around so they can get their money back. The other discussion is, the other point is whether they knew what they were investing into. They should have, if they had done their credit analysis a little bit more thoroughly, then they would have known all along that Greece was not in a position to ultimately pay all these debts back.
Okay, thank you, Murat. Now we're going to move.
So now the question is, I think whether Greece will secede, and Europe will just say, screw you guys, you knew what you were doing, we're not giving you any more money, or they'll sort of, for the sake of European Union, they'll keep Greece to give them more money and keep them.
Right. And also, before we move into this question, I asked that everybody make sure their cell phones are silenced. This is being live recorded, so for the audio. All right. So the question is, will Greece secede from the EU in the next decade by 2025? John Rosen, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. The quick answer is no, I don't believe they will secede within the next 10 years. As I think about that question, ultimately you have to look at it two different ways. Right? The specific way you've asked is, will Greece secede? And I've already said no. And another way to look at it is, will all the other ones let them secede? I grew up in the South, and I know of some states that tried to secede from this place, and they're still trying to fix up their infrastructure today. The EU and the Euro and NATO and a few other great edifices are the crowning glory, the constructs of the post-World War II world. And too many elites all over the world, not just in Europe, have too much invested in making sure it stays together. They have pounded into Europe that breaking up of the Union would lead to another world war, and Europe never wants to go through that again. Germany and the rest of the rich countries can afford to bail out Greece if they want to, and if they need to, they will, because the broader issues are too terrible to contemplate. And every time we've looked at the abyss on one of these great edifices like NATO and so forth, we as a collective human race have backed off and say, we can't let it fall down, and they won't let it fall down over Greece.
Right. Okay, that makes time. So John Rosen is no, Greece will not secede in the next decade. Marcello, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I will also say no. Less for historical reasons than I think for just bottom line dollars and cents reasons. I think there's a new government in Greece that was elected in January. They came to power on the promise of renegotiating the bailout terms and easing the austerity measures, and they want to move forward with that. They are certainly threatening to secede and say goodbye, guys, but they also realize that the Northern Europeans are terrified of them seceding because they're terrified of this domino effect that then Portugal could look at Greece and say, hey, if those guys can go, why don't we go? And then once Portugal goes, Spain can look at Portugal and say, hey, Portugal went, let's get out of here too. And then finally there's Italy. So there's a whole Southern European phenomenon, and Southern Europe is generally in bad shape financially when compared to Northern Europe. And if that were to happen, it would be catastrophic. I mean, we're talking trillions of euros. So I think that the government that's in place in Greece now fully understands that, fully understands the fear that the Northern European, predominantly the Germans, have of that happening. And I think they'll use that to their advantage to renegotiate the bailout terms and ease the austerity measures that they're operating under.
Okay, so that is no from Marcello as well. Murat, you have 2 minutes.
Couple of things. I also think no. I agree with John's political views there, and I actually disagree with Marcello on that Spain and Portugal would want to leave. They need the money of the rich Europeans. They if anything, they don't want to leave. But I mean, there are a couple of points here. There's this tendency of solving structural and fiscal problems with monetary measures, and it always ends badly, with a lot of tears. If Greece leaves, there'll be losses and this and that. The big fear is the domino effect. But Europe will survive. But politically, there's much more of a sort of a entrenched interest for Greece to stay, and there's a lot of interest for Greece to stay in the euro. Ultimately, what will happen is, there's going to be a lot of jawboning and all that. And then they will have to institute some real structural changes in favor of businesses, entrepreneurs opening businesses, and they change their tax structure, government spending, and the Europeans will have to eat some of their losses because they threw bad money at them in the first place, so they deserve it. And then through a lot of fight, they'll just sort of all stay together with unhappy relatives living under the same roof.
All right. So you conclude.
They will not leave.
They will not leave. Okay. Caroline.
Yeah.
You have,
okay.
2 minutes.
Okay. So I agree. They will not leave. And why would they not leave? Well, what are the benefits for them leaving? Really, the way the EU is set up is, I think that at this point they need to work together more as a community to kind of handle, and they've tried that, but unfortunately it hasn't really worked. But the negative impact of them leaving, what is that going to do for their neighbors and for the economy as a whole? So I don't think they will. Could they potentially be forced out? Well, I guess that's not the question. So no, I do not believe they will leave. I think they will go through the measures to renegotiate the debt yet again, have more extensions. We're already looking, they just refinance that 250 billion they owed until April or something. So we'll see what happens, but they will not willingly go.
Well, just one question, is that the question,
right.
Willingly go?
Oh, willing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is
What
the question, will they
Just
be in the
go,
euro
right?
10 years from now, or will they?
The question
Right,
is,
that's
will
the
they
question.
secede? So
Will they
Well,
leave?
secede is willing.
Them leaving? Not being pushed out?
Secede means, I think, they're
On their own
it's
terms.
their own.
Okay.
their own
Right, so I do
decision.
not
Okay.
think they will leave on their own terms.
Okay.
Okay. Does that
Right,
fill
that's
the
why I was
answers?
like,
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I wasn't quite unsure.
Yeah, no, on their own terms. So,
Okay.
So no,
all right, so the panel is unanimous. We go to David now to finish off.
our
I
outlier.
mean, I'm still confused about the question because the issue is not, it's about whether the EU will continue to subsidize Greece by lending them money if they default on this round of debt, right? Or not willing to renegotiate. So I think that over the next 10 years, at some point, the rest of Europe, specifically the northern countries, are going to stop subsidizing Greece. I mean, I agree with most of the geopolitical concerns that the panels mentioned. I just think in the grand scheme of things, I mean, Greece needs Germany because they lend the money. And with respect to Italy, Portugal, and Spain, they also need German lending, but they also buy a lot more stuff from Germany than Greece does. So in isolation, Greece is sort of irrelevant to the European Union because it's a very tiny economy, it's not very productive, and they really are kind of always going to take more than they ever contribute to it. And I think at some point, the northern countries are going to have to sort of let somebody like Greece kind of just go because, you know, if you keep giving a drug addict drugs, you're not going to cure the problem.
So you think that they'll just be sort of booted out?
No, I think in 10 years from time, Greece will not be part of the EU anymore.
Okay, so you could say no, that they will not be part of the EU again.
But they're not going to voluntarily. Remember, they're not going to. They're not going to sustain. Greece is not going to come up one day and say we don't want to be in the EU anymore, right?
Yeah.
But Greece's issue is, will you guys keep lending us money?
Okay.
To be part of the EU.
Okay, yeah, that's more clarified. So, do you guys still want to say no, that they will secede or they will be booted out?
I don't think they're going to secede, and I don't think they're going to get booted out.
Yeah, I would.
I mean, so you don't think they'll do either? Okay,
Yeah.
and the panel is unanimous there. Besides,
Yeah.
Okay. We will take a vote from the crowd, I suppose. I guess we have the three options. We have they will not be secede or booted out. And what David argues is that they will be booted out eventually, right?
Yeah, they'll not be part of the euro anymore.
Yeah, they won't be part of the European
Eurozone.
Union. So, Ashley?
There's only two.
Yep, only two this time.
Who believes that they will be booted out or seceded? And who believes that they will not be part of the European Union?
That's the same thing.
Yeah,
They're gonna-
it's the same
who's-
thing.
Wait, no, if booted out and stay. Alright, sorry. So the two options are if that they will remain in the European Union in the next decade, and the other one being that no, they will be booted out. Okay. The option for them is to secede.
In or out?
In or out?
In or out?
Right.
Who will be in? And who believes they'll be out?
Wow.
So the crowd consensus is
Out.
out. Okay.
Definitely out.
Disagree with the panel, but that's good. Once more, we're only going to do 2 rounds for this question for the round 2. So, John, you have the floor.
So we're still talking about Greece, right?
Yeah, if you want to, I don't know, maybe perhaps persuade David, or maybe you can change your opinion. You know.
That's one of those things, like,
David, I just think
you don't want to interrupt.
the whole structure is just too important to the elites, not only in Europe, not only the Germans and the French and the people that can write a check to bail out Greece if they want to. The whole structure is too important to other people like the North Americans and the Japanese and the Chinese and so forth, who have a stake in the continuation of the EU as more or less as it's currently constructed. And consequently, I believe they will simply not be allowed to break it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Marcello, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I might be coming around to David's point of view. I still think in the short I still think in the short term that they're not going anywhere, and I do think they're not going anywhere. But I do believe that what David said is correct. That ultimately, the Northern Europeans are going to say enough is enough. We've got our own people to take care of. We've got enough pressure in our own countries to finance our own issues. So I think that stream of funding is going to eventually stop. Now, but I do believe it could be at a time. My guess is it'll be at a time when the situation in Greece has turned around some, and they will continue to stay in the Eurozone. So I'm going to stick with my prediction that they're going to stay. But I do also agree with David that I think eventually the gravy train is going to end.
Right. Yeah, because the question is within the next decade. So for the next decade, they will stay.
Yes.
In the long run. Okay, Murat.
Yeah, the bigger question is EU itself sustainable with the bifurcation of currency union and political union? You got to have both. I don't think it's in its current form really sustainable. So the Greece question becomes a little like a footnote. I think European Union will have to make some real structural changes to be relevant and vibrant in the next 10 years. So with that, I think, to have the headache of booting out Greece at the same time that they have to do all these painful things, they're not going to want to deal with that, and I think Greece will still be in. They have much bigger problems than just Greece right now.
Okay, so the EU as a whole is at stake.
Yeah, I mean, look, why didn't England join? They were smart.
Still keep the pound.
Well, they're part of the EU, but not part of the
Not the
euro.
currency.
Not the
Yeah,
euro.
not the currency.
Not the
Not the
currency,
currency.
just the union.
No, I do know that they're not on the same currency.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
They did that,
Yeah, yes, but they're not.
That's the
Yeah.
question.
It's a bit more of a separate
they're
entity.
happy about that.
Yeah.
So,
Poland, too.
Caroline, final
That's
thoughts?
Switzerland.
Yeah, so the word secede has me kind of torn a little bit, because secede I feel like is to willingly leave, and I don't think they're going to do that. So, but I do potentially think they could be forced out. I think their counterparts, their neighbors are sick of them. Germany's tired of paying back debts that they've had from 50 years ago. So I am kind of switching my position, and I do think in the next decade they could be exited from the EU.
So you think in the next decade they will be, so you're switching?
I'm
You're-
switching.
Okay.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. All right, so they will be out of the EU. And David,
I mean,
final thoughts?
I still kind of have the same views. I mean, I don't think, I'm not as convinced as I was on the previous issue in my position. I think it's 55-45, because a lot of, my argument is that Greece is really kind of irrelevant to the EU in isolation, but I agree with, the precedent stuff. And the flip side is, if you don't kind of send a message with someone who's not really relevant to the whole thing surviving, then you run the risk that these bigger countries that are more crucial to the euro actually working will kind of continue down this path of, hey, well, we can kind of screw up because they'll bail us out anyway, and that ultimately could lead to the breakup because those issues are a lot bigger. And I'll add one personal anecdote. I was in Greece a few years ago. My summer spent a semester there, and we went to go visit him for a week. And if sitting around in cafes and smoking coffee or smoking cigarettes created GDP, Greece would be in the G2. So I'm biased from that reason alone.
27%.
Okay, so and you believe that they will be booted out?
I
in the next
still believe
decade?
they'll be out of the euro at some point in the next 10 years, yeah.
Okay, so from the panel we have
3 to 2.
3 no's and 2 yeses, 3 to 2. So that means that the panel's come to the collective decision by majority that they will be in the European Union within the next decade. So now we will poll the crowds.
Okay, let's do change their minds. Who believes that they will be in? And who believes they'll be out?
Murat.
Okay, so it seems like they'll be out, right? Okay.
So
I'd
far,
like
they're
to see
like,
them out.
what, we have
We have until
people-
6:30?
No, I don't think that.
Okay.
I think it's generational.
Alrighty, guys. So we're gonna quickly move on to the next round. Who will be the Republican candidate for president in the upcoming election? Try to come up. Yeah, it's big, but if you
Is
try to
my
come to like 2 or
question?
3 names.
Yes.
This is my
on.
question.
Yes.
Would David? Would you rather elaborate?
I
mean,
I have. I don't know that I can go for 2 minutes on this.
That's fine.
but,
That's good.
okay, so who I think will be the Republican candidate would be Jeb Bush. The reason why, moderates.
Actually, I'm sorry. This isn't time for opinions. Just time to explain the whole situation.
Well, we have an
Oh.
election. That's the
Oh.
situation.
Yeah, it's not much. Just yeah. about all the
Does
people
anybody in the room not know there's a presidential election in 2 years?
Right, I don't know how to explain that. Right.
Do you all know what Republicans and Democrats are?
Oh.
That we
I
have a
don't-
primary system?
I'm sorry, I don't know that I'm prepared to discuss all of the contenders.
That's fine. That's fine. David.
Or do you want us to go through all the contenders with them?
Or just like the big names.
Well, Jeb. I mean, I think he's a big name. I don't
One
know.
official contender.
Cruz, maybe, or-
Okay, so I have Martha McSally on there because I feel like if I were to pick who I would like to be the candidate, I don't know that she's considered a big one, but I feel like the Republican Party needs to make amends for what they did with Sarah Palin years back, and I think one way to do that would be with Martha McSally, who is representative from Arizona, right? I hope I'm
Okay.
right.
So.
So,
All right. Well, in that case, I guess we have your answer for round 1, so we'll just jump right into it.
Okay.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, I
Actually,
threw it
no,
off.
it's fine. We're gonna actually start at that end of the panel. So, David, what do you think? You have a minute and a half now.
I think it's going to be Jeb Bush. I think if the Republicans in a country where they are demographically challenged due to the population want to get a candidate elected for president in the current system we have for electing presidents, they have to bring someone to the table who is moderate enough to win some of those crossover votes. I think he'll have a hard time in the primaries, because primaries, tend to attract the core conservative voters in the Republican side. And, if they want to pick someone like Ted Cruz, God bless them, but I don't think he's going to win a national election. I think Bush has, the experience of being a governor. I think we all kind of learn from the mistake of electing someone who's never kind of really run anything in their life before. He's moderate on most social issues. He is going to appeal to minority candidates because of his family situation. And I think he's the most electable guy that's in the Republican stable right now.
Okay, so you think that Jeb Bush is the
Yep.
and Caroline, you said McSally?
I think Jeb Bush, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I was
Jeb
just kind of throwing Sally out there. I don't know.
So that would be the third. Okay, but you think Jeb Bush is the most likely?
Yes.
Okay, Murat?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Jeb Bush too. I mean, like David said, primaries are really appeal to the very right wing and the very left wing in the Democratic and Republican Party. They're the foot soldiers. They raise the money and all that. So you have to keep them happy. But ultimately, general elections are won and lost in the sort of that top, the middle 10-15%, the swing voters. And Jeb Bush has a successful record as a governor. He's actually well versed and has more moderate views regarding education and immigration and all that. And I think as we saw in the last by-elections, the Republican Party has kind of woken up. They said, look, we want more moderate candidates, and that's going to serve them well, and they're going to continue that trend, and I think that he's going to be the person.
So also Jeb Bush?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the Republican Party knows that a Tea Party or fringe candidate has no chance. So it's down to the establishment candidates, and there's probably three that I would think of immediately. Scott Walker, Chris Christie, and Jeb Bush. Scott Walker is milquetoast. He's about as exciting as watching paint dry, and he's plagued by his labor issues in Wisconsin. Chris Christie is way too divisive. He's a hothead. He flies off the handle. He's going to be plagued by Bridgegate and also by his love of Obama over Sandy. The big hug to Obama over Sandy, which a lot of Republicans just couldn't abide with. So that leaves us with Jeb Bush, who is the establishment candidate, has an ability to raise lots of money, is well connected, moderate in some views, and also, importantly, is married to a woman from Mexico. And he speaks Spanish, and he has a reasonable level of appeal to the Hispanic community. And the Republicans need that vote. They've not made any headway with that vote, and Jeb Bush is a guy who could truly appeal to that constituency. Ted Cruz is a guy who claims to have Hispanic ties but does not speak a word of Spanish.
Okay, so Jeb Bush again, and John?
I say Mitch Daniels of Indiana. I think everything that my colleagues on the panel have said basically reflects conventional wisdom, and my read of history is that conventional wisdom gets blown up in the primaries. For all the reasons Marcello noted about the 3 or 4 leaders that you mentioned, they will savage each other in the primaries, and nobody amongst those 4 will emerge. They'll be too busy cutting each other's hearts out and pointing to them beating on the sidewalk. And furthermore, my read of history is that the front runners at this point in the cycle, in open years when there's no obvious incumbent to seek the nomination, front runners tend to burn out. So I say to myself, who's a non-front runner that still fills the need for the Republicans to have a centrist, because American elections are won in the center, and I come down to either Rob Portman or Mitch Daniels, and I pick Mitch Daniels.
Okay, Mitch Daniels. So we have 4-1.
Yeah.
Would anybody on the, oh yes, poll of the crowds.
Okay, so who believes in Jeb Bush? Anybody for Mitch Daniels? Hey, Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush.
Mitch Daniels,
All right.
that's an interesting choice.
Okay.
Nobody likes Martin.
Okay, so we're going to take just 30 seconds, just a really quick break for the panelists, rest their voices. Just observe your fellow regions.
I should have better
We're
prepared
going
for
to
my
the last
questions.
question.
There was a time.
No, it was nothing for you to say. I mean, there was no.
I should have better
between
prepared for
four
my
questions.
question. I was like, I don't.
Yeah, that one doesn't need any explaining.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I know, I was like,
Right. I mean, the other questions need a little bit of,
right.
you know,
Yeah, well,
but that would be
Hey
better
guys,
explained.
we're ready to come back.
Whoa. And
Yeah, our voices are rested.
I know, I'm
That was
like,
30
All right,
seconds.
Jeb Bush.
everybody listen up.
I
I have some devastating
don't know what he
news.
wanted you to describe. It's like,
We're not going to be able to talk about
Thanks for
fiduciary
jumping in.
duty.
Oh.
Sorry about that. So we have a little fun one for you here.
Okay.
Oh, yay.
Who will win the NCAA tournament for both men and women? I'm going to let Ashley, who's just at championships, talk about this, about who are the runners. All right.
Come
so,
on, Ashley.
Last question, by the way.
Tell us.
Well, I personally, I haven't really been watching it just because I'm paying
You were
attention
playing it.
towards Division 2, so I really don't really pay attention to the Division 2 one. But if I was to give my opinion for the women, I think it's going to be UConn. They won it last year. They're number one in the country. And representing Connecticut would be good. I honestly have an opinion, so don't ask my opinion. Okay.
Harvard.
So this one's okay. We're going to start with David.
Dave, do we got to give a reason or just our prediction?
Give some reason.
I mean, I think it's going to be UConn on the men's side and UConn on the women's side and Kentucky on the men's side. I'll certainly defer to Ashley's judgment, since she's far more an expert than I am. And also, UConn's won their first two games by an average of 46 points. Like she said, they win it almost every year. I think they're the overall #1 seed in the whole tournament, and they got probably the best coach in women's basketball. So, and Kentucky has 5 guys on the team that could probably beat the Knicks right now. So,
That's not.
I think the UConn women can
that's a
beat
good
the
reason.
Yeah.
Probably. That's a good point, actually. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Caroline.
Yeah, so I concur, UConn women's and Kentucky for men's, and my reasoning is because I saw it on Sports Center briefly as I was, so I that's all I have for my reasoning.
That's totally fine.
Oh, okay.
This is legit as it
Murat.
gets.
Yeah, me 3.
You 3. Okay. Perfect.
They're just way too strong.
Yeah. And Marcello.
Well, I have actually written documentation here that Kentucky will win.
That's
I don't know where I got
cheating.
this, but it clearly states Kentucky's going to win the men's division, and I don't think anybody can take the UConn women. I think they're just too
Same
overpowering.
conclusion.
Exactly.
So we are unanimous. Till John Rosen.
Well, I expect I should continue to make it unanimous, unlike the Mitch Daniels thing. I will give my rationale. I have not had the time this year to follow it very closely, so when all else fails, I just go with the favorite, and everything I do read about Kentucky is that they can't be beaten. So I'll go with Kentucky on the men's side. On the women's side, I'll go with UConn because my wife left me and moved to Texas, and UConn is playing Texas tonight, and anything that pisses Texans makes me happy.
Yay. Fair enough. So big poll of the crowd. Yeah, who agrees with them? Okay. Very nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't watch basketball, so I wouldn't know. But that concludes the Delphi panel. I hope you can see how really just the interface between the experts. Okay.